Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and today we're going to be talking about a terrible law that could really affect YouTube on a grand scale. Now this law is actually coming from Canada in specific, and this is a law that would have widespread impact for pretty much all of your favorite creators on the internet, especially ones that live in Canada though. Now it's nothing new that there's like horrible laws that are brought up and, debated, and whether or not the public agrees with them or thinks that they're terrible, right? We've had all kinds of, even specifically internet laws that have been completely terrible, that have come and go, that have, not been passed or whatever the deal might be. But this is one of the worst internet-related laws that I think I've ever seen, and realistically, I think that this would have a chance to do some pretty major damage, not only to YouTube, but to most online social media platforms that people upload content to. So that means this could have widespread impacts across YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, pretty much any massive social media where people can upload content. Now, the law in specific that we'll be talking about today is something called Bill C-11. Now, before we really get into what Bill C-11 is, there's a couple terms that I want to run by everybody here to kind of, give you a little bit of a definition on what we'll be talking about today. One of those being CanCon, okay? So CanCon might sound like some sort of like shitty convention or something going on, but that's not really what it is. So basically what CanCon is it's a series of guidelines that helps the Canadian government promote content, at least in this instance, if it's quote-unquote Canadian enough. So basically, let's say I'm a creator in Canada, right? My content, in order to fit under CanCon's definition, I would have to meet 6 out of 10 points. Now, CanCon is a definition that's pretty easy for older companies and legacy media, which is another term we're about to go through here. These legacy media companies, they can pretty easily meet these CanCon requirements. But for instance, a Canadian YouTuber or something like that would have a much harder time meeting these CanCon requirements because, frankly put, most of them don't have a massive team behind their production or anything. A lot of them, it's just one, maybe 2 or 3 people or something that's involved in the production of something, and so they don't meet these key creative functions as it's been described that it would require them to do so in order to meet these CanCon descriptions, okay? So another term we're going to be talking about a lot here is legacy media, and when I mean that, it's basically like the, the giant conglomerates, the MSNBCs and all the TV networks and, news stations and TV stations, television shows, things like that. That's legacy media, things that you would kind of think of as more of like a boomer technology, right? Now, the reason we're talking about legacy media is because in specific, Bill C-11 here really goes out of its way to protect these legacy media companies. If you didn't know, legacy media has been dying out over the last few decades with the rise of the internet and online content creators and, people making YouTube, TikTok videos, things like this. The amount of eyes that are constantly on the legacy media brands and companies is constantly on decline. People are, choosing online content, online streaming content much more often, and at an increasing rate because, well, the content's more convenient, it's a lot more personal to the person who wants to watch it, among plenty of other reasons. So this Bill C-11, what exactly will it do? Well, it can have widespread impacts on all the social media algorithms. I know I'm specifically talking about YouTube a lot in this video. That's because, well, we're on YouTube, you're watching YouTube videos, and YouTube is going to be probably the most affected. But it basically creates these changes in the algorithm that can be unintentional and could actually end up destroying content creation for Canadian creators. So, in short, in layman's, basically what Bill C-11 could end up doing is promoting content on social media that fits the CanCon definitions, while de-ranking or delisting and negatively impacting content that does not meet the CanCon descriptions. Now keep in mind, earlier in the video I told you that most online content creators that you can think of are never going to meet the CanCon descriptions, right? So for Canadian creators who don't meet these CanCon descriptions and whatnot, they can end up seeing over time their views decrease, they can end up seeing their recommendations decrease. To give you a little bit of insight on how YouTube works, right? One of the big things that helps push content on the platform is engagement with a video, or let's say, you really like my videos, and I'm not a, Canadian creator or anything, I live in the United States, but let's say I was a Canadian creator, okay? The more of my videos that you watch, the longer you watch my videos and whatnot, the more likely YouTube is to recommend that content to you. This is how it works for pretty much everybody. The more you watch a specific type of video or creator or, a certain interest on YouTube, the more likely these things things are to be recommended to you because YouTube wants to keep you on the platform for as long as possible. They want you to watch more videos, watch more ads, possibly spend money on the platform through memberships and whatnot. This is how recommendations on YouTube work. So, for instance, if you watch a lot of my content, you're going to get more and more recommendations for content like mine and for my content in specific. That is because there are no requirements that I need to meet really in order to basically pass the validation check other than, hey, do people watch his videos? Have they subscribed? Do they leave a like? Have they commented? Things like that. These are all inputs that are used to help recommend content to you that is more personalized so that you enjoy using YouTube more. This system would be severely threatened by Bill C-11 because obviously Canadian creators that meet the CanCon requirements are more likely to be basically recommended to Canadian viewers, regardless if their content actually meets the requirements that YouTube would have actually had in place to actually recommend that content in the first place. So let's say you like Some Ordinary Gamers, Mutahar, who is a Canadian creator, right? And you watch a lot of his content, you watch his videos very often. Well, hypothetically, if he doesn't meet CanCon requirements or anything, you could end up seeing less of his videos in your recommended or even in other areas of YouTube that they use to recommend, so like your watch nexts and stuff like that, simply because he doesn't meet these requirements. Now, of course, it doesn't keep in mind whether or not you care about these requirements or you care about this stuff. It doesn't really keep that in mind. It could be disastrous for creators for this specific reason, okay? Let's say that this was passed into law and whatnot, and the recommendations on YouTube were changed for Canadian viewers. And they start to get recommended more Canadian content, regardless if it actually interests them or not, simply because it's Canadian. They click on it or whatever, and they don't actually like the video that they end up watching. They click off of it early. That could severely impact the watch time, the click-through rates, all kinds of different things that are absolutely vital to getting people's content recommended on a global scale. For instance, not all of my viewers are in the United States, and only a couple percent, pretty much, of my viewership is in Canada. But if your click-through rate and all these other elements that go into your recommendations and whatnot on YouTube are negatively impacted by a law like this, it could have widespread impacts on Canadian creators that are actually negative. So independent creators who don't meet the CanCon requirements and whatnot could see a massive drop-off in their analytics, which could actually end up negatively impacting their channel altogether, and all in the guise of them being Canadian. So one of the things that's being hyped up about Bill C-11 is that it'll level the playing field between these streaming companies and these legacy broadcasting companies and individual creators, which it absolutely won't. Legacy media companies are already favored by the CanCon requirements, and there is no specific language in this bill that provides any sort of protection for individual content creators or small-time people, which is another massive issue with this law in the first place, is where it actually counts when it comes to protecting individual creators and people on a more small-time place. There's really no language that protects them from being negatively impacted by not being in the CanCon requirements. There is no new set of CanCon requirements for online content creators. It more or less skews everything back in favor of these legacy media companies that, by the way, are already dying out. These are companies that are getting beat by YouTube, that are getting beat by individual content creators like myself, and they're clawing back to relevancy however they can. And this is one of the latest attempts for them to crawl back into, these legacy media companies to crawl back into position to actually compete, basically protecting out these companies that are just being outcompeted in a way. And with these vague definitions and these lack of definitions that really need to be put into something like this, we're basically getting to a point where it doesn't very well define some of the most important categories of creators that it's really trying to regulate. For instance, the bill doesn't explicitly exclude all user-uploaded content for social media platforms, which content creators obviously fit that definition, right? I create user-uploaded content. Your favorite Canadian creators create user-uploaded content for the internet and whatnot, for social media platforms and whatnot. They are not specifically protected in this bill, and that is a problem because with the bill already skewing things in favor of these legacy media companies, there needs to be some protections put in place for creators and for the ecosystem that the internet has created. Now you might be wondering, well, Optimus, why exactly is this happening? If it's such a bad idea, why is this going down in the first place? Well, the real reason why, and this is of course my personal opinion, but I think it can really be kind of backed up by multiple other instances of this happening, even like here in the United States. Most most lawmakers are old heads, okay? Just to put it very simply, you know, they didn't grow up with the internet. They were probably in their 30s or 40s by the time that computers really got put out on a mass scale, the internet really started to take off and everything. So they don't really understand the internet in the first place, and of course, being in the position to create laws and pass these kinds of regulations, essentially they're regulating something that they have not a very good understanding of. And these legacy media companies are absolutely loving it because at the same time that they can try to influence these people that don't really know enough to make these kinds of laws in the first place, it's giving them an increased chance and relevancy to fight against online content creation in a way that could have widespread impact, right? So while we're common internet users and we can see the issues with this, these old people either don't see the issues with it because they don't use the internet enough and don't really understand the culture of the internet, or they're blatantly ignoring these problems basically for profit, which is exactly what these legacy media companies are looking for in the first place. They're trying to make money from this. This isn't about leveling a playing field. There is no unfair playing field. They're simply being outcompeted by platforms like YouTube, and they're trying to do whatever they can to claw back. So at this point, any type of requirements like this that alter the algorithm of these platforms, it either needs to be opt-in or it needs to be dropped. You basically should be able to choose whether or not you have to follow these regulations because it could have such a widespread impact, right? I mean, in essence, we're talking about these laws artificially impacting the algorithm of places like YouTube to skew results potentially in favor of larger Canadian media companies. And for content creators and people and overall just content that you already don't really want to see, which is going to make the user experience on YouTube worse and the content creator experience for Canadians worse. If they're going to add these types of requirements, it needs to be an opt-in thing and not just random enforcement by a government body that harms smaller creators. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a bill that could have widespread global impact even if it is a Canadian bill. I mean, the audience of YouTube creators is a global thing, right? Like I said earlier in the video, it's not like just people from the United States watch Optimus content. There's people from everywhere in the world, and the same applies for Canadian creators. So basically putting this law in place is going to harm Canadian creators, I feel like. I don't really see this benefiting anybody except for legacy media, and I definitely think it needs to be changed. So with that being said, thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel, follow me over on Twitter and Twitch at @SubToOptimus. Make sure to check out Shoptimus down below, and until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, well, talking about Bill C-11 and signing out.